to introduce our keynote, and if we're all ready to go here, hopefully. Julia Conzon is a geographic data scientist from Vancouver that works on collecting, managing, analyzing, and visualizing geospatial data with a focus on making data more accessible and interpretable. Julia previously worked at Statistics Canada on their crowdsourcing project and is currently working at Mapbox as a data team intern in Ayacucho, Peru. One of her projects is to educate Canadians like us about building Canada 2020 and encourage participation among new and established mappers. So thank you very much for agreeing to be here today, and take it away, Julia.
Hi everyone, happy GIS Day. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so today I'm just going to give you a little presentation on OpenStreetMap, how you can contribute to OpenStreetMap, and provide more information about building Canada 2020 and how it kind of took off and how you guys can participate in it. I was going to give a little intro to myself, but Ian already did so thanks, Ian. So just a quick outline, give introduction about Mapbox, then I'll give an introduction about OpenStreetMap, and particularly how it's used for education purposes as well as for humanitarian mapping, kind of data for good, and then outline building Canada 2020. So Mapbox is a location data platform for mobile and web applications. We provide building blocks to add location features like maps, search, and navigation into experiences you create. So we pretty much give you the tools to create maps. And so, for example, like on Snapchat, there's the Snap Maps that's powered by Mapbox. And in this image, you can see that National Geographic is using Mapbox as well as the Weather Channel. So most of Mapbox's products are open sourced, and as their data derives from OpenStreetMap, actually, they play an active role in the open data and OpenStreetMap communities. And that's like really what got me interested in getting involved in Mapbox. Mapbox has several different teams that power these products, including the data team's community team who volunteer on various education, humanitarian, open data projects. So for example, 2 weeks ago, there was the Indigenous Mapping Workshop in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Mapbox educated participants on OpenStreetMap and how they can use OpenStreetMap to map their own communities. So just a little bit about OpenStreetMap. Ian gave a good introduction about kind of how OpenStreetMap was kind of initiated, but the main idea was a lot of spatial data sets at the time in 2004 were expensive. They could have been outdated and they weren't widely accessible. So there was kind of this need to create a collaborative project of like a free editable map of the world. And so in 2006, the OSM Foundation was established to kind of promote the growth of OpenStreetMap globally, and they started developing all these different tools for how you can actually contribute spatial data. And they made simple tools like ID Editor that allowed people that may not have an extensive GIS background to kind of contribute data, and they made more technical tools like JAWSIM for people that maybe have a bit more technical skills or have more of a GIS background. But essentially, there's kind of three main ways to contribute data to OpenStreetMap: armchair and field mapping, as well as data importing. Armchair mapping involves scanning satellite imagery and digitizing the geometry and attributes of objects, which is what I believe you'll be focusing on for your mapathon. There's also field mapping, which you go out in the field, you collect GPS traces, you take notes, and then you bring that information back to the computer and you digitize that information. And then lastly, there's data importing, which can be a little bit more complex because you need to make sure the spatial data sets licenses are compatible with OpenStreetMap, but it's a nice way to kind of really add a lot of data at once into OpenStreetMap. In the past 10 years, OpenStreetMap has grown to over 3 million contributors, and it's used by a variety of organizations in various sectors. For example, Facebook and Mapbox use OSM data for their products. Governments like Statistics Canada and Canadian Red Cross are now starting to use OpenStreetMap for data analyses. NGOs like Crowd2Map, which is based in Tanzania, are using OSM to empower marginalized communities to map their own land and to use the data for their own needs. Other NGOs like Youth Mappers are using OpenStreetMap as a platform to educate and empower students to map. And then lastly, organizations use OpenStreetMap for humanitarian work. So I'm going to just detail a bit about education and humanitarian mapping. There's many organizations like Youth Mappers, Teach OSM, and Mapbox who are starting to educate schools about OpenStreetMap and web-based open geospatial technologies. So just a quote from Youth Mappers, their goal is to cultivate a generation of young leaders to create resilient communities and to define the world by mapping it. So University of Calgary and McGill University are actually starting chapters with Youth Mappers, and it's pretty much engaging students to kind of work on these or become familiar with those open geospatial technologies and work on various projects and share their experiences. Teach OSM is a great resource for professors and teachers on how to integrate OpenStreetMap into their curriculums. And then lastly, there's the Open Data Challenge that's actually occurring right now, and it's being powered by the City of Bloomington and Mapbox, and the challenge is open for all students, and you register for the challenge, and then you pick between two challenges that are related to visualizing open geospatial data, and then you submit your project for to be judged. And so, as mentioned above, OSM is also being used by several organizations for humanitarian purposes, but I wanted to focus on humanitarian OSM team, known as HOT. They're known globally, so that's why I kind of want to focus on them because they work on disaster and community mapping. HOT developed what is also known as the Tasking Manager, which actually the Canadian OpenStreetMap community adapted to make the Canadian Tasking Manager that you'll be using for your mapathon. So basically what's great about this tasking manager is it lists a bunch of different types of projects. Maybe, for example, in mid-September, there was those 2 earthquakes in Mexico, and they wanted to start mapping out all the buildings and roads in those areas so that the data can be used by the government to deploy response teams there to help the people there. So they created 2 projects to go out and map those areas. If you look at this image, to your left or right, I'm not sure, but you pretty much would be zoomed into that region, and then you have a grid system. You select a box, which is known as a task, and you pretty much go in there and you start mapping through looking at satellite imagery, following the instructions that are provided. So now let's focus on Building Canada 2020. So the Building Canada 2020 is the second wave of Statistics Canada's crowdsourcing project. For those of you who don't know about the crowdsourcing project, it started about 2 years ago by Statistics Canada as a way to see if crowdsourcing can be used to collect data and use that data for statistical purposes. And they decided to use OpenStreetMap as a platform to collect that information. So pretty much they engaged with the local citizens and the OpenStreetMap community in Ottawa and Gatineau to collect this building footprints and to collect certain attributes of those building footprints. The success of the project actually came from working with the municipality of Ottawa to release a specific data set, the building footprint data set and the address points in a license that is compatible with OpenStreetMap. And then a lot of the local OpenStreetMap community imported that data onto OpenStreetMap. So the second way, since it was quite successful, Statistics Canada wanted to start initiating a new project called Building Canada 2020, which is map all buildings in Canada by 2020. But instead of them orchestrating the project, they really want it to be a community-led initiative. So that means they wanted different federal government departments, they wanted municipalities, they want NGOs, citizens, the OSM community, universities, colleges to collaborate together and really take off this project and make it successful. So you may ask, why buildings? Why not other objects on Earth's surface? Well, there's a lot of benefits to having building footprints. First off, there isn't one comprehensive database of all building footprints in Canada that it can be valuable for various different analyses. For example, building footprints and wheelchair attribute data can be merged together and used to assess a city's accessibility or a town's accessibility. Building data can be merged with property assessment data to visualize property assessment values, and you can compare it across different cities and towns. Apart from urban analyses, the building data is used for disaster response. So, for example, in spring 2017, Gatineau experienced severe flooding, and the Canadian Red Cross used the building information within OpenStreetMap to validate the number of homes impacted by the high water levels. They also use the data to produce base maps of the affected area for planning and delivering assistance. So it was really great to see that an actual government was using this OpenStreetMap data, this open data, to help citizens. Apart from natural disaster responses, it's also a great opportunity to give rural representation. There tends to be a focus on, urban areas. In OpenStreetMap, there definitely is an urban-rural divide that exists on it. Like, a lot of the urban areas are very well mapped, but not a lot of the rural communities are mapped. Also, in terms of municipal open data sets, a lot of rural areas don't necessarily have the resources to provide those types of data sets. So this project really kind of allows for those areas to be represented on the map. So how you can participate, there's various ways. The main focus would be obviously importing existing data sets into it, but like I just mentioned, a lot of the time those data sets don't exist. So that's why we still need to have armchair and field mapping. So if you're interested in getting involved in the Building Canada 2020 project, I highly suggest checking out the wiki page that has been set up, and it's been a lot of information is being added on it constantly by the government, by myself, by the OSM community. I wrote a blog post about 2 weeks ago, kind of about Building Canada 2020 and about OSMG Week and all the various mapathons that are happening across Canada to focus on this project. And I also highly recommend, joining the OpenStreetMap community, creating an account, and participating in the OSM Canada's listserv, because there's lots of conversations going on there about how to, properly map areas in Canada. So if you're interested in the project, also you feel free to contact me. And if you're interested in kind of hearing more about postgraduate options in GIS, I'm happy to kind of give you my advice or my own experience. I was a recent graduated 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, from McGill University. So yeah, there's my contact information. You can also check out my GitHub if you want to see some of the code I work on. Any questions?
Julia, I've got a question.
Yeah.
I see the utility of putting streets and building envelopes up on this through crowdsourcing. I'm just wondering how, after the event has taken place, how that is maintained. How is the data set kept relevant over time?
That's a great question. So I guess the idea would be you have this open database of building footprints, and the government will take that data and keep it in their own kind of silos to make sure that data is accurate. The data can constantly be changing, because satellite imagery is constantly being updated on OpenStreetMap, so you can go and change the data over time. But there's been a lot of research on the accuracy of OpenStreetMap data compared to administrative data sets. And one thing that's been kind of confirmed or been kind of well received is that the OpenStreetMap data is more up to date than the government data, because the government data tends to have to go through longer surveying processes, or they go out on the streets and actually survey, so it ends up taking longer, and there's more resources involved in creating those data sets. So in general, the OpenStreetMap database is more up to date, and they have the tools that allow you to constantly be updating that information. And there is quite a large OpenStreetMap community within Canada that's paying attention, particularly mostly in the urban areas. But this is why this project is starting to exist, so we can start educating people all over Canada about OpenStreetMap and how they can all participate and constantly keep the database up to date.
Thanks.
I have a question. Is there a way to automate this process based on different types of rasters?
Yeah, exactly. So at Mapbox, we're starting to actually use machine learning to pick up certain objects through satellite imagery. Facebook actually is also doing that. They did a presentation at the State of the Map Boulder, which is kind of the conference for OpenStreetMap in the United States. And they actually talked about how they're using machine learning through looking at satellite imagery to pick up on road networks. And I know Microsoft did that as well. They looked at satellite, they use machine learning to pick up buildings through satellite imagery. And our Natural Resource Canada is currently doing research on that as well.
So is there like a way that would ever replace the need for like volunteers to digitize this themselves?
So there's discussion on that. I think for now, the methods that are applied for using machine learning to pick up buildings is not accurate enough to, like, let alone just assuming that's the way to go. There still needs to be human eyes. So for example, the Facebook, their research, so they have these algorithms going to pick up buildings, but before they actually use that data, they have human eyes confirm whether that it is correct or not.
Cool.
So I've got a question here. Recently the BC government depreciated a bunch of their web mapping service layers, and so I used to rely on them for good street mapping that looked kind of similar to Google, so that when I was making maps, it worked well with the existing information I had. When they got rid of that, I didn't have a vector layer anymore to use, and I tried using the OpenStreetMaps, but I couldn't find a vector WMS to use in my mapping layers. I'm talking about ArcGIS here. So is there a web mapping service that you can bring into StreetMaps? I saw that you could download large data sets and then symbolize them yourself, but I would prefer to just use something that you just add quickly and not have to and the building outline to be awesome to put on too. If you could put them on top of ortho imagery and make them semi-transparent or something like that, I could see leveraging this data with my existing work practices. I think it could probably make use of this data, but I'm finding it's locked in this base mapping layer when I'm using it in
Yeah, so I was gonna say, when I first kind of got introduced to OpenStreetMap, I agree. I had those same experiences with how do I actually use this data? So there's various different platforms that allow you to actually just download the data from the OpenStreetMap database as a GeoJSON. I'm pretty sure also as a shapefile, so that can be used for Esri products. So MapZen allows you to download data directly from OpenStreetMap database, but they do at the city level, and it's by boundary boxes, so it's not actually by this city boundary. So what I recommend you doing is there's a website called GeoFabric, and GeoFabric you can download the planet, which is every single object on OpenStreetMap's database. You can download it all. You can download it by the country level, and in Canada you can download it to the province level. And then you can use certain open geospatial libraries like GDAL to actually kind of clip the region that you want. It gets very complex. If you want, you can reach out to me via email, and I can provide you with those resources to make it easier for you to extract that data. I also, on my website, I have a tutorial actually kind of listing out the tools to use to extract OpenStreetMap data.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll share some maps that I use using the system too.
That's a good question, and I guess from your experiences with state of the map and so forth, is there any movement towards creating sort of map services that would be possible, or an API or something that would allow using to OpenStreetMap data online instead of downloading and processing it that way?
I don't know about that yet. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't. I can look into it though and get back to you.
The other thing too is that building, like the information that you guys are collecting about the attributes to do with the buildings, is that public information?
Yeah, so the idea about OpenStreetMap is, you're using satellite imagery, so it's already kind of open in the public. But the main thing is getting the building footprints for now, and then you can add the addresses, which are public for the most part, if they're already on like an open data portal. Most other tags that are or attributes that are associated with building footprints would be the stories, so number of floors that are in the building, as well as like whether it's wheelchair accessible, whether there's Wi-Fi. But there is a growing community in OpenStreetMap that's starting to do actually indoor mapping, which that's starting to be more contentious in terms of privacy issues. But that's not our focus on the Building Canada 2020 project. It's really just getting those building footprints that are in the public already.
I believe that HOT was doing some research into the ability of volunteers to identify damage to buildings and other infrastructure after natural disasters or conflict. Do you know any of the preliminary results of that?
No, I don't have a connection at Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. I didn't even know they were doing that. That actually sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it was in partnership with a university in, I can't remember which one, in the US.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much, Julia.